The scent of salt and the soft murmur of waves had always been the backdrop of my life in the coastal town. My cottage, a charming structure of stone and wood, was the embodiment of my grandmother's love for the sea and her spirit for independence. Here, I poured my heart into marine research, and it was here that Ethan, with his tousled hair and laughter that echoed the playful dolphins, asked me to be his partner in life's great dance. Ethan's words, "Will you marry me, Julia, and share this dance forever," still echoed in my heart as the most harmonious melody I'd ever heard. Our wedding was a misty morning affair, the sea's mist kissing our cheeks as we exchanged vows. Life seemed to be in perpetual bloom, much like the roses that climbed the walls of our cottage. But as the years drifted by, the tides of change began to stir. Ethan's once passionate embrace grew distracted, his mind often lost in the worlds he spun in his books. My silent companion, the sea, witnessed the subtle shifts, the soft withdrawal of his hand from mine as the seasons cycled. One evening, as the autumn leaves began their descent, Ethan's parents arrived, their faces etched with lines of worry deeper than the trenches I studied. Their home, once a fortress against uncertainties, had been claimed by an unforgiving economic tide. "Julia, my dear, we have nowhere else to go," Ethan's mother whispered, her voice a brittle leaf in the wind. His father, a stoic man, stood silent, his eyes pleading. Ethan, looking to me with hope and desperation, said, "They just need a place to weather this storm, just for a little while. Can we offer them our home?" How could I say no? This was family, and family meant anchoring each other against the capricious seas of fate. So, I nodded, and our home became theirs. Days stretched into weeks as Ethan's parents settled into a routine that clashed with the rhythm of our life. The study, my sanctuary where I'd lose myself in the mysteries of the ocean's depths, became their room. My meticulous notes and delicate samples were packed away to make space for their belongings. "You don't mind, do you, Julia?" Ethan asked one day, as we shuffled my research into boxes. "It's just until they get back on their feet." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt like anchors tying me down. My sanctuary was slipping away, and with it, the essence of who I was. "I don't mind," I lied, forcing a smile as I sealed another box, a small piece of myself tucked away with my research. I turned to look out the window, where the horizon blurred into the sea, wondering when the tide would turn in my favor once again. The rhythm of the coastal town was like the heartbeat of the earth, slow, steady, and serene. That serenity was the soul of my cottage, which stood as a silent sentinel by the sea, guarding the secrets of the deep I sought to unravel. My life with Ethan, interwoven with the tranquil passage of days, was a soothing sonnet until the day the uninvited storm swept into our lives. It was a gusty autumn evening, the kind that whispered of coming change. The sunset was ablaze with fierce oranges and reds, a fiery omen to the turmoil that was about to unfold. Ethan's parents arrived on our doorstep, their faces shadowed not just by the failing light but by the gloom of their plight. "Julia, we've hit a rough patch," Ethan's father said, his voice as rough as the storm-worn cliffs. His hands, once strong and steady, trembled like fragile leaves. "We need a haven, just for a short spell," his mother added, her eyes brimming with the storm of her sorrow. "Could we impose upon your good graces?" I felt Ethan's eyes on me, wide and imploring. The gravity of the situation was as heavy as the anchor on my favorite necklace, the one he had given me on our first anniversary. "Of course," I replied, the words hollow as they bounced off the walls of my sanctuary. "Your family. Our home is your shelter." The gratitude in their eyes was immediate and intense, like the sudden calm after a storm. But the calm was deceptive, for their arrival was not the eye of the storm, but the harbinger of chaos. As night fell and the cottage braced for the intrusion, I found myself in the garden, seeking counsel from the ancient roses. The thorns, sharp and protective, seemed to echo my thoughts. "Julia, you're not having second thoughts, are you?" Ethan's voice broke through my reverie as he joined me under the starlit sky. I turned to him, searching his face for the man who had once understood my every silent thought. "I'm worried, Ethan. Our life is not built for such disruptions." He took my hands in his, the warmth familiar yet distant. "Their family, love. We must weather this storm together. It's just for a little while, I promise. His reassurance was meant to be a lighthouse in the fog, but I could only see the encroaching darkness. The storm had arrived, uninvited, and I could not foresee its passing. Back inside, as we made room for the newcomers, the cottage seemed to shrink, its walls closing in on me. My study, once my temple of discovery, was stripped of its identity, each artifact of my research a reminder of the life I was now packing away. The storm had breached the walls of my sanctuary, and as I watched Ethan's parents nestle into the heart of my home, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The cottage, Ethan, and I were now at the mercy of an uninvited storm, and I could not help but wonder if we would ever find our way back to the serenity we once knew. As the days unfolded into a tapestry of awkward cohabitation, my cottage, the keeper of my solitude and scholarly pursuits, began to transform. The familiar scent of salt and old books mingled with unfamiliar aromas of Ethan's parents' cooking and the heavy cologne his father wore. Our once spacious living room, adorned with seashells and driftwood sculptures, now hosted his mother's porcelain figurines and gaudy tapestries that clashed with the soft, natural palette of the seaside. One morning, while attempting to prepare breakfast in the now cramped kitchen, I accidentally knocked over a newly placed spice rack, a gift from Ethan's aunt. The clattering sound as it hit the floor echoed my inner turmoil. "Oh, Julia, do be careful," Ethan's mother chided from the kitchen table, her voice sharp as the shards of glass at my feet. "These are family heirlooms, not some sea pebbles you can just sweep away." I bit back a retort, crouching to clean the mess, feeling the sting of her words more than the prick of the glass. "I'm sorry, Marianne." "It was an accident," I said, keeping my voice as calm as the eye of a storm. Ethan, entering the kitchen with a furrowed brow, surveyed the scene. "Julia, what happened? Are you okay?" I looked up at him, the frustration clear in my eyes. "I'm fine, Ethan. Just a bit crowded in here, that's all." He knelt beside me, helping to gather the spices. "I know it's been hard. They're trying to find their footing. We just need to give them a little more time." I wanted to scream, to tell him that with every passing day, I felt more like a castaway on my own shore, but I swallowed the growing lump in my throat. "Yes, time," I murmured, unsure whether I was referring to the time they needed or the time I had already lost. Weeks morphed into months, and the once inviting spaces of my cottage became foreign ground. My study, a sanctuary where I had spent countless hours engrossed in marine research, was now Ethan's parents' bedroom, the bed where they slept a mere arm's length from my cherished desk. One evening, as I tried to work on my latest paper amidst the cacophony of the television from the next room, Ethan's father leaned into the doorway of the study. "Julia, would you mind turning down that lamp? We're trying to watch our show." The request was simple, but it stripped away the last semblance of my domain. I looked up at him, the lamp's glow casting shadows on my work, the work that was the essence of my being. "Of course, David," I said, voice barely above a whisper, as I reached for the switch, darkness descending upon my world. That night, as I lay in bed, the sound of the ocean's waves crashing against the shore was a cruel reminder of the shore of my life that was vanishing before my eyes. The tide was going out, taking pieces of me with it, and I lay there, feeling as helpless as a beached starfish, longing for the sea to carry me back to where I belonged. The relentless march of time brought neither solace nor departure for Ethan's parents. Instead, my cottage became more entrenched in their presence, every corner echoing their occupancy. Ethan, once attuned to the subtle shifts of my moods, now navigated around his parents with a strained politeness that hung heavy in the air. It was on a particularly overcast day, with the sky mirroring the tumultuous sea within me, that Ethan approached with a hesitation that belied the gravity of his words. The kitchen, once my laboratory of culinary experiments, now bore the marks of his mother's reign. "Julia, can we talk?" Ethan's voice held a tremor that I hadn't heard before. I paused, my hands wet from the dishes I was washing, sensing the foreboding ripple of an incoming tide. "Of course, what is it?" He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the floor as if searching for words among the tiles. "My parents, they need more time to sort things out. The market is tough, and well, And? I prodded, a knot forming in my stomach. Ethan met my eyes, and there it was, the rogue wave in his pleading look. They've asked if you could stay with your sister for a while. Just until they find a new place. The suggestion struck with the force of a tidal wave, leaving me floundering in disbelief. My voice was steady, though, as I replied, "You want me to leave my own home, Ethan?" He reached out, but I stepped back, the soapy water dripping from my fingertips a physical reminder of the mess this situation had become. "It's not what I want, but what they need, Julia. It's temporary, just for a little while." The words "temporary" and "a little while" had become as meaningless as a broken buoy adrift at sea. "Temporary seems to be a relative term these days," I retorted, the sting of betrayal lacing my words. Ethan ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew all too well. "I know this is hard to ask, but they're my parents. We need to help them. And what about me, Ethan? Where do I fit into this equation of familial duty?" My voice was rising now, the storm within me breaking free. He looked pained, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the situation was too much to bear. "You are my wife, Julia. You're part of this family. I thought you understood the meaning of sacrifice." The word sacrifice echoed mockingly around the room. I realized then that my silence had been my acquiescence all along, my compliance mistaken for approval. "I understand sacrifice, Ethan, but I never agreed to be the one always making it," I said, my resolve hardening like the coastal cliffs. In that moment, I understood that a rogue wave had not only hit but had been building all along, and now, it threatened to wash away everything I held dear. The foundation of our marriage was being eroded by the very family it was supposed to shelter. As Ethan stood there, looking as lost as a ship in a maelstrom, I knew that the next choice I made would either anchor me to this spot or set me adrift in search of new horizons. The rogue wave had hit, and in its wake, I would have to find my footing or be swept away forever. The cottage, once a vessel of cherished memories and scientific discovery, was now submerged in an undercurrent of tension and unspoken regrets. The relentless presence of Ethan's family, like an invasive species, altered the delicate ecosystem of our home. Ethan's plea for me to vacate my sanctuary had become the catalyst for a revelation, a hidden current that had been stirring beneath the surface of my compliance. It was amidst this turmoil that I found myself in the attic one afternoon, seeking refuge among the relics of my past. The attic, with its dust-laden beams and musty scent, held the remnants of generations. There, tucked away in an old steamer trunk filled with my grandmother's possessions, I discovered a collection of documents yellowed with age. As I sifted through them, the musty air seemed to thicken with the gravity of my find. The papers, penned in my grandmother's elegant script, were like a beacon from the past. They spoke of the cottage and its lineage, of its intention as a place of solace for the women in our family. I was poring over the legalities when Ethan found me, the dim light casting long shadows across the attic. "What are you doing up here, Julia?" His voice was soft, tinged with concern. I looked up, the weight of the papers in my hand grounding me as I met his gaze. "Discovering the truth," I said, my voice a mere whisper, but resolute. Ethan crossed the attic to sit beside me, his eyes scanning the documents now spread between us. "What truth?" "These papers," I began, my fingers tracing the faded ink, "state that my grandmother left the cottage to me, and only me. It was meant to be a sanctuary, Ethan. For me. For us. But not for an indefinite family occupation." Ethan's face paled as he absorbed the words, the implications as clear as the coastal waters on a calm day. "Julia, I had no idea." There was a silence then, filled only by the creaking of the old house and the distant call of seagulls. "I've been adrift, Ethan, in my own home," I continued, the hidden current of my words now surfacing. "I've been silent, but no longer. It's time to reclaim what is rightfully mine." Ethan reached out, his hand hovering over the papers as if to touch them would solidify their reality. "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs like a sail catching the wind. "I want my home back, Ethan. I want our life back." And that means your parents need to find another place to live. He nodded slowly, the crestfallen look in his eyes, telling me he understood the magnitude of what I was saying. I'll talk to them, he said, finally touching the paper, a symbolic gesture of acceptance. I'll make this right. As I watched him descend the attic stairs, the papers clutched in his hand, I felt the tide within me shift. The hidden current had been revealed, and with it, a newfound strength surged through me. I was the keeper of the cottage, the custodian of my own fate. And it was time for the tides to change. As the sun cast its golden net over the horizon, the cottage seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the change in the tides. The walls, once suffocating in their closeness, now stood firm around me, protectors of the legacy my grandmother had entrusted to me. The aged papers from the attic lay on the table before me, their power palpable in the silence of the early morning. I was sipping my tea when Ethan walked in, his face etched with the lines of difficult conversations had and decisions made. Julia, I've spoken with them, he began, his voice a mix of resolve and sadness. And? I pressed, setting down my cup, its clink of punctuation in the stillness. They'll leave, he said simply. They understand that this was never meant to be a permanent solution. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I felt a release then, a loosening of the knot that had tightened in my chest over these past months. Thank you, Ethan. It means more than you know. He sat across from me, his eyes searching mine. What will we do now, Julia? Where do we go from here? I reached for his hand, feeling the familiar warmth that once promised forever. We start anew, Ethan. We chart a new course, together. But we also set boundaries, for us, for our sanctuary. Ethan nodded, squeezing my hand in his. I want that. I want us to go back to the way things were, to find our way back to each other. I smiled, the gesture tinged with the melancholy of lessons learned. We can never go back, Ethan. But we can move forward, wiser and more aware of the currents that run beneath the surface. In the days that followed, the cottage slowly shed the remnants of its unwanted occupants. Ethan's parents, with subdued farewell, embarked on their own journey to an uncertain future. And as the door closed behind them, the cottage seemed to exhale, the air lighter and filled with the promise of reclaimed dreams. The roses outside bloomed with a vigor as if in celebration of the renewal within. Ethan and I spent our days restoring the cottage to its former glory, each brushstroke and rearranged piece of furniture an act of healing. One evening, as we sat in the garden, the sea whispering secrets to the shore, Ethan turned to me, a glimmer of the old mischief in his eyes. Julia, do you think the tides are with us? I leaned into him, my head resting on his shoulder. They are, Ethan. As long as we respect their ebb and flow, as long as we swim together with the currents and not against them. And there, with the setting sun casting a soft glow over our little haven, we began to chart our new course. The cottage, with its ivy-clad walls and ocean views, stood as a testament to the strength of one woman's resolve and the enduring power of love. It was a beacon, a lighthouse guiding us through the misty waters of life, and as the stars began to sprinkle the sky with their silver light, I knew that we would navigate this journey with grace and fortitude. For I was the ocean's daughter, and this was my shore.